I recently saw a news story about a 10-year-old girl in Florida who was attacked by a 9-foot-long alligator. She was sitting in 2 feet deep water in the designated swimming area when a 9-foot-long alligator swam up to her and bit her on the leg. But thankfully, this alligator was no match for this 10-year-old girl. This 10-year-old girl had recently taken a class on what to do if you are ever attacked by an alligator, and so she knew exactly what to do. She started, once the alligator clamped its jaws around her legs, she started punching it in the nose because apparently that's really annoying to alligators. And then once the alligator was annoyed, she grabbed the jaws, opened them up, pulled her leg out, and she escaped to safety. She ended up with 10 stitches. And the alligator was caught and is on its way to becoming probably somebody's purse. If you live in Florida, or if you ever visit Florida, are you worried that an alligator might ever attack you? Maybe, maybe not. But an alligator attack is just one of many things in the world that people might worry about. And worry is exactly what we're talking about this week. We'll be focusing on Jesus' words from Matthew chapter 6, where he starts out the section by saying this. He says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life." And as we go through the week, we'll talk a little bit about what Jesus means when he says you should not worry. But first, today, I want to talk about what he doesn't mean. When Jesus tells you not to worry about anything, he's not saying that we can't love and care for each other deeply. In fact, if you are worried about someone, it probably means that you love them, that your heart is attached to them. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing when parents want their children home safely at the end of the day. It's a good thing when you care about your parents, your spouse, even yourself, your own life. In fact, this whole section is a declaration from God that he does too. When he tells you not to worry about your life, he's saying that he's concerned about your life, and he knows something about it. He knows that your life is unique compared to anybody else's life. He knows that the challenges you face are unique, and so are the struggles that you face. So are the reasons that you feel grief. So are the ways that you cycle through pain and sadness when you have to say goodbye to a friend, a child, a spouse, a mom, or a dad. Jesus knows that your life is unique, and he has some great reasons why each unique life doesn't need to worry, and I'm looking forward to sharing them with you this week. Derek is 19 years old and he lives in Arkansas. His mom is sick and is unable to work, and so unable to provide financially for Derek and his many siblings. And so Derek does. Derek works full-time at a UPS shipping place for $11.90 an hour, and he uses that money to support his family. The UPS shipping place where he works is 5 miles from home, and Derek doesn't have a car, so he walks to work every day. A 10-mile round trip, getting up early enough in the morning to get there in time for a shift that starts at 4 a.m. I bet you Derek might be tempted to worry about things from time to time. And there are any number of people in his situation who might be tempted to do the same thing, and Jesus has something to say to them. In Matthew chapter 6, he says this, "Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes?" And to get a sense of what that means, I want to ask you a question. What do you think is easier for a mother to do? To provide food and clothing for their child, or to give life to their child? It is easier to provide food and clothing for their child, because a mom didn't actually give life to their child. God did. Moms carry a child for 9 months. They deliver that child when it's time for the baby to come out, and they provide for that child with the many resources that God gave them. But they didn't give life to that child. God did, and that means something. Imagine that you have a 16-year-old child and you want to give them a car for their birthday. Would you give them the car, but then fail to give them the keys? You don't provide the much bigger thing and then fail to provide what that bigger thing needs to run, and the same is true of your life. If God provided the bigger thing, your life, he's going to provide what it needs to run, just like he did for Derek. One day recently, when Derek was at work at his UPS plant, his supervisor told everyone to stop working and to come out into the courtyard. He got everyone's attention, he had a few announcements, and then he pointed to Derek and he said, "Derek, we don't want you walking to work anymore." And then he tossed them the keys to a car. And he said, all of us chipped in. Derek wasn't looking to be rewarded. He just wanted to take care of his family. He just wanted to serve them well. And God took care of him through the friends who wanted him to know that he had friends who had his back, just like God has yours. I don't know the different things that you're worried about in your life, but the fact that God gave you life, the fact that he gave you the life of his son, it means something. It means you don't need to worry that God's going to fail to provide what your life needs to run. There was a married couple in England that recently wanted to get rid of an old piano, and so they decided to donate it to a local community college. When the community college received it, they wanted to get it tuned, so they hired a professional piano tuner to come in and tune the piano, and when the tuner came in and opened up the piano, he discovered something inside. Inside the piano were 913 gold coins, more than 100 years old, together worth more than $500,000. The couple that donated the piano had no idea that they were inside. But if they had, do you think they would have given the piano away? Probably not. You don't just give away the things that are valuable and important. And Jesus makes the same point in the Gospel of Matthew, not by pointing to a piano, but by pointing to the birds of the air and the flowers in the field. He says this, "Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the lilies of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. And if that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith?" So picture Jesus standing in the middle of a field, pointing to the birds above him and the grass beneath him, and he points out that God provides so abundantly for the birds that's the reason they fly so freely, and he provides for the grass so abundantly. It grows so abundantly that we have to cut it down once or twice a week because it's growing so fast, and then we just throw it away. And then he asks the important question, what do you think means more to God, the birds and the grass that he provides for so abundantly, or you? You see his answer if you think about the blood-stained grass that was at the foot of Jesus' cross, or if you think about the birds that were soaring above its shame. At the cross of Jesus, we see exactly what means most to him. It wasn't a piano, it wasn't gold coins, it wasn't even his own life. It was yours. So do not worry. You are worth more to him. A while back, there was some major flooding in the southern part of our country, and there was an incident that you may have seen on the news. It was an SUV that had flipped over entirely and was sitting in the rushing water, and inside the SUV was a little baby. The water was rushing by the vehicle so fast that it was impossible to open up the doors because the pressure of the water was preventing that from happening, and thankfully somebody noticed that there was a little baby inside, rushed to the car, but of course couldn't get inside, and then more people noticed, and they came and they started trying to get inside, but they couldn't figure out how. They started rocking the vehicle back and forth, pushing on the windows, pushing on the doors, doing whatever they could, until finally one man emerged from the water in the SUV holding the little baby in his arms, and the little baby was not breathing. He started making his way through the rushing water to get to the other side of the water where the paramedics were, eventually handed the baby over to the paramedics who started performing CPR, and someone was filming this whole thing on their phone. And if you watch the video, you can hear a woman in the background praying over and over again that God would give breath to this little kid. And he did. The little baby lived. How often do you feel like that little baby in the SUV? Drowning, maybe not on water, but on worry, from some situation you may or may not have seen coming. I want you to think about everything that needed to happen in order to save that little child in the SUV. Firstly, somebody needed to notice that the child was in there, and then they needed to actually decide to do something about it, and then they needed to struggle their way through the rushing water, and then the child needed CPR, and then someone needed to pray, putting the life of this precious child into the hands of our Heavenly Father. And if any one of those things did not happen, I think the situation probably would have turned out far different. But it didn't. And Jesus says really the same thing about you. Everything that needed to happen to save you from a life in which we pretty regularly feel like we're drowning, it did happen. In verse 33 of Matthew chapter 6, Jesus tells us to do something. He tells us to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. But before we can seek those things needed to be prepared. And they were, when Jesus shed his blood. But only after he noticed us drowning in this world. And only after he decided to do something about it, he put on human skin and he dove into a world that is so regularly flooded with danger because he knew that that was the only way to put our fragile lives into the hands of a God who is compassionate and abounding in love and slow to anger. But unlike that little baby in the SUV, Jesus really did die. He really was dead because he really did want his sacrifice to give you the gift of forgiveness for all the times we have doubted him, to give you the gift of his righteousness, to give you the gift of knowing that every step that you take in his kingdom is one that you can take with confidence. Just think about the last thing you were worried about. I bet you had a solution in your mind as to what needed to happen in order for you to stop worrying about that situation. If only such and such would happen, if only I could control the outcome, if only I didn't have to live by faith, if only I didn't have to trust God when he says that everything's going to be okay. But that's what Jesus tells us to do first, when he tells us to seek first God's kingdom. Worry has less to do with what's going on in your life and more to do with what's going on in your heart. We learn to stop worrying by learning to love God and his word and his promises more than anything. And I wish I could tell you that I've always done a really good job of that. I wish I could tell you that I have loved God and his word and his promises so abundantly that I have never worried about anything. But I can't. And I don't think you can either. We all worry. At many times, for many different reasons, and yet as different as we all are, we do have one thing in common. We can all look back and see that God has never failed to love us more than anything. Even when it hurt, even on the most painful weekend of his life, the God who gave us life allowed his life to end on a cross so that you and I could walk through life not only knowing that all of our doubts and all of our worries have been forgiven, but also knowing that our God really will pay any cost. He will do anything to take us to the one place where our souls will be filled so abundantly that we will never even be tempted to worry about anything ever again. And about the best thing you could ever do as a parent, as a child, as a spouse, as a friend, is help someone to see that each day, because in this section on worry in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus promises that each day you are going to find something without even trying. He says, each day has enough trouble of its own. Each day your heart is going to find reasons to feel troubled. Each day you're going to be tempted to worry about many different things, so each day make the time to seek first God's kingdom. Open up the Word and be reminded again of the wonderful promises of God that we get to live on. Open the Word and be reminded again of the wonderful home that God has already prepared for you and your loved ones in heaven. Open up the Word and be reminded of how uniquely your life is cared for by your Father in heaven. And then remember what it's like to walk through life without fear of the future, because of a Jesus who gives us the right to walk through life without worrying about anything.